Colonel Potter, sir, my last wish is to be buried in my mother's wedding gown.
I've seen these Dodgers for 40 years, all the tricks. Dismissed!
There are television shows, and then there are television shows that fundamentally change the way we understand what the medium is capable of. MASH is firmly in that second category. From the moment it debuted on CBS in September of 1972, it refused to be just another sitcom. It was set against the backdrop of the Korean War, yet everyone watching knew it was really about Vietnam. It was technically a comedy, yet it made millions of Americans cry. It ran for 11 seasons, long enough to outlast the actual war it was depicting by nearly 8 years. And across all that time, it collected one of the most beloved ensembles in television history. But here's the thing about ensembles, they change. People leave. Some go quietly. Some go loudly. Some leave for reasons that make complete sense in hindsight, and others walk away from something they'd spend years wishing they could get back. MASH was no different. Behind the laughter and the heartbreak that viewers saw on screen, there was a constant undercurrent of tension, ambition, exhaustion, and creative friction that would ultimately push several major stars out the door. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on those departures and exploring the real reasons why some of television's most beloved characters disappeared from the 4077th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. Let's start with the exit that hit audiences like a freight train. At the end of Season 3, MASH did something that television almost never did at the time. It killed off a major, beloved character. Not off-screen in a throwaway line, not in some ambiguous cliffhanger, but definitively and quietly, in a moment that stopped the country cold. Radar O'Reilly walked into the operating room, hat in hand, and told the surgical team that Colonel Henry Blake's plane had been shot down over the Sea of Japan. There were no survivors. The man who played Henry Blake was McLean Stevenson, and his departure was entirely his own choice. From the outside, his reasons seemed straightforward enough. He wanted more. He had watched the show evolve over 3 seasons and noticed, correctly, that it was becoming more and more centered on Alan Alda's Hawkeye Pierce. Alda wasn't just acting at this point. He was writing, directing, and shaping the creative DNA of the entire series. Stevenson, for his part, was funny and warm and genuinely gifted, but the spotlight kept drifting towards someone else. What drove McLean out wasn't pettiness. It was ambition, and in Hollywood, that's a completely understandable force. He believed, genuinely and passionately, that he had the talent and the charisma to carry a show on his own. He wanted to be the lead, the top of the call sheet, the name above the title. And so he walked away from one of the most successful programs on television to chase that dream. The Aftermath is one of Hollywood's great cautionary tales. The series he headlined after MASH failed to connect with audiences. The stardom he had envisioned never materialized in the way he hoped. And as the years passed, it became increasingly clear that Henry Blake had been something rare and irreplaceable. A character so specific, so human, and so perfectly matched to the performer playing him that no subsequent role could come close. Stevenson himself would later reflect on his departure with a candor that was both honest and heartbreaking, acknowledging that he had underestimated what he had. He passed away in 1996, and those who knew him remembered not a bitter man, but a talented one who simply made a gamble that didn't pay off. The writers, for their part, turned his exit into one of the most powerful creative decisions in television history. Rather than give Henry Blake a tidy, comfortable farewell, they chose to honor the show's central premise, that war is not clean, endings are not always happy, and not everyone makes it home. If McLean Stevenson's departure was shocking to audiences, Wayne Rogers' exit was shocking to the producers. Rogers played trapper John McIntyre, the other half of the show's original comedic duo, and when he decided not to return for Season 4, he did so without warning, without ceremony, and, as it turned out, without any binding legal obligation to stay. The details of his situation are fascinating. Rogers had never actually signed a formal contract with the production. He had been working on the strength of an agreement that was never fully executed on paper, which meant that when the producers attempted to hold him to his commitment, they found themselves without legal recourse. He had not broken a contract because there was no contract to break. But why did he leave? The answer is similar to Stevenson's in some ways and completely different in others. Rogers was not chasing a dream of solo stardom. He was reacting to something more specific, the gradual diminishment of his character's purpose. Trapper John, in the early seasons, was genuinely Hawkeye's equal. They were partners, co-conspirators, two sides of the same rebellious coin. But as Alan Alda's influence over the show's creative direction grew, Hawkeye became increasingly the moral and emotional center of every story, and Trapper became the man who stood next to him and agreed. Rogers later described it plainly. His character had gone from a co-lead to someone who largely existed to react to what Hawkeye was doing. For an actor of his intelligence and ability, that wasn't enough. He had too much self-respect to continue showing up for a role that had stopped asking anything meaningful of him. His post-MASH life took a direction that almost no one in Hollywood takes. He became a serious financial investor. Wayne Rogers had studied history at Princeton, and he had a mind that worked differently from most actors. He built a significant career in finance, became a respected market commentator, and by most accounts found the success and intellectual satisfaction in that world that television had stopped offering him. He passed away in 2015, and the tributes from his former colleagues were warm and genuine. Alan Alda, who had remained a friend, described him as one of the smartest people he had ever known. Of all the departures in MASH's long history, Gary Burghoff's may be the one that requires the most compassion to understand. He played Radar O'Reilly, the sweet, intuitive, slightly magical company clerk who served as the emotional conscience of the entire camp. Radar could hear incoming helicopters before the sound carried to anyone else. He slept with a childhood teddy bear. He was, in many ways, the soul of the show. And the actor behind him was slowly being consumed by the weight of it all. Burghoff had a unique distinction among the cast. He was the only performer to reprise his role from the original 1970 film. He brought something to the television version of Radar that the movie hadn't explored, a genuine sweetness and vulnerability that transformed the character from a minor comic figure into one of the most beloved presences on American television. That was a remarkable achievement, and it cost him. By the later seasons, Burghoff was struggling. The production schedule was relentless. His perfectionism, which had helped him build Radar into such a carefully drawn character, was also working against him, feeding anxiety and dissatisfaction that were hard to quiet. He was a husband and father who was spending enormous amounts of time away from home, missing the ordinary daily moments that, once gone, cannot be recovered. The professional demands of the show and the personal demands of his life had stopped being compatible. He asked for concessions, more time off, reduced appearances, greater flexibility. The producers tried to accommodate him, because losing Radar was genuinely unthinkable. But eventually, the accumulation of everything, the exhaustion, the distance from family, the emotional labor of playing a character so nakedly tender for so many years, became too much. He left after season 8, and the show gave him a farewell that matched the character's stature, a quiet, aching two-part episode in which Radar finally went home. After MASH, Burghoff largely stepped away from the spotlight. He found restoration in painting, in nature, in work that had nothing to do with cameras or audiences. He has spoken honestly, in the years since, about needing to reclaim himself after a role that had asked so much of him for so long. There is nothing in his story that resembles failure. It is simply the account of a sensitive man who gave everything he had to a role, recognized when the well was empty, and made the difficult, necessary choice to stop. Major Frank Burns was, by design, a man you were supposed to find infuriating. Petty, self-righteous, cowardly under pressure and insufferable in authority, he was the perfect comic villain for the show's early years. And Larry Linville played him so effectively, so completely, that it became the problem. The difficulty with Frank Burns was not that Linville couldn't act. It was that Frank, as written, had no room to grow. The other characters on MASH were deepening, finding new layers, confronting the war's moral complexity in increasingly sophisticated ways. Frank just kept being Frank, the same tics, the same insecurities, the same function as a target for everyone else's wit. Linville recognized, with considerable artistic honesty, that he had done everything the role had to offer. He chose not to renew his contract at the end of season 5. He wasn't pushed out. He wasn't the subject of backstage conflict. He simply understood that staying would mean treading water in a role that had stopped challenging him, and he respected both himself and the show too much to do that. His exit allowed the writers to bring in a different kind of antagonist, one with actual depth, and MASH became a richer program for it. Any honest accounting of MASH's cast changes has to include what didn't change, and specifically, who didn't leave. Loretta Swit played Major Margaret Houlihan for the entire 11-season run, and her commitment to that character represents one of the quietly heroic acts in television history. Margaret began as a caricature. Her nickname was a punchline. She was written, in the early episodes, as a foil and a figure of ridicule. Swit refused to let that be the end of the story. Season by season, She pushed for more complexity, more humanity, more of the contradictions that make real people interesting. By the end of the series, Margaret Houlihan was one of the most fully realized characters on the show, a woman who was simultaneously tough and wounded, professional and passionate, loyal to an institution that often failed to honor her in return. She was one of only 4 cast members to appear in both the pilot and the final episode. In a show that saw so much turnover, her constancy was itself a kind of statement. MASH endured for 11 seasons not because it never changed, but because it was willing to change, willing to lose people and find new ways to tell its story, willing to let characters die or disappear or grow up and go home. Every departure, painful as it was, forced the show to ask harder questions about what it was and what it wanted to be. The actors who left did so for reasons that were, in nearly every case, entirely human. Ambition, exhaustion, artistic frustration, the need to be somewhere other than a television soundstage. Some found what they were looking for. Some discovered, too late, that they had already had it. But all of them contributed to something that still resonates more than 50 years after its premiere, a show about the cost of war that turned out to be equally about the cost of caring, of creating, and of staying present in the middle of